The Varelian outpost of Cathara's Reach was meant to be a listening post, quiet, distant, and peaceful. Perched on the edge of the galaxy, its role was passive: monitor gravitational anomalies, track rogue asteroid belts, and keep an eye on the distant void beyond the galactic rim. It was never intended to be a fortress. Then the shadows came. Without warning, the stars behind the outpost dimmed. Scanners failed to register any incoming fleet, no hyperspace trails, no warp distortions, just darkness folding in from the edge of reality. And then the attacks began, unseen weapons tearing through Varelian alloy, slicing through energy shields like they were mist. Dozens of defense turrets blinked out. Communications were jammed. Escape was impossible. Cathara's Reach was under siege by something no one could name. The Varelians, a proud and ancient species known for diplomacy and logic, were not prepared for such raw brutality. As the station's systems began failing, Commander Alan Zeth, the post's leader, ordered one final desperate act. An emergency SOS, broadcast in a high-frequency narrowband, burst across deep space. It was encoded in ancient diplomatic protocols, meant only to be understood by their allies in the Galactic Concordat. But in their haste, a fatal mistake was made. One of the junior technicians, under pressure and panic, loaded the wrong frequency packet. Instead of the latest Concordat diplomatic frequency, the distress signal was fired on a deprecated channel, one that hadn't been used in over 200 years. A frequency long thought silent. Forgotten. It was not. Because 200 years ago, the humans had intercepted that frequency, and they never stopped listening. Back on Earth, well, not Earth exactly, but a remote orbital array still running ancient monitoring software in the Oort cloud. An alert pinged to life for the first time in generations. A long-dead military. AI stirred from hibernation. Deep in the icy dark, a defunct human listening post blinked online. Red lights flared, systems whirred. The signal had been received, and Earth answered. The Varelians never knew. The signal never reached the Concordat. What was meant as a diplomatic cry for help reached the wrong species, one the galaxy had long assumed was gone, or worse, had become something no longer concerned with the petty affairs of the known universe. But humans heard it, and they remembered. They remembered being ignored, underestimated, feared, hunted. They remembered being pushed into the void until they became part of it. The cry for help was not just intercepted, it was understood, and deep in the strange dimensions where humanity now dwelled. Not as bodies, but as something else entirely. Something stirred. Not because they cared about the Varelians, but because something new was threatening the edge of the galaxy, and no one, not even ancient horrors, got to lay claim to the void without answering. To Earth. The distress signal hit Earth's deep-range relay net during a routine training exercise. An ancient Terran AI, nicknamed Warden 6, flagged it instantly. Most civilizations would verify the signal, assess the threat level, contact the diplomatic corps, but humanity didn't follow those protocols anymore, not since their departure. Warden 6 pinged a nearby training fleet already engaged in a high-intensity simulation. The fleet, unofficially called the Black Veil, received the call mid-maneuver. They stopped the drill and then jumped. Total response time: 11 minutes. The Varelians expected that, if anyone answered, it would be Concordat ambassadors or maybe an automated drone escort, something civilized. Instead, reality tore open near Cathara's Reach as a Terran fleet dropped from FTL like thunder. Sleek black hulls, hull-mounted railguns, and ships bristling with quiet malice surrounded the outpost. No negotiations, no greetings. The unknown attackers barely had time to react before orbital kinetic strikes hammered them into vapor. Rods of tungsten accelerated to Mach 20 punched through their stealth vessels like tissue paper. Within moments, power-armored Terran Marines dropped onto the outpost surface. Faceless, silent, and efficient, they moved like predators in a museum. Behind them came the medics, laughing, chatty, unnervingly calm. Drones swarmed over the wounded Varelians, scanning injuries, administering aid, and sawing off debris and armor with mechanical precision. One medic whistled as she adjusted a Varelian's broken limb. "You're lucky. Last week we treated a guy inside a black hole. Nasty headache." The attackers never stood a chance. The message was clear. Humanity got the call, and they do not knock. The battlefield was chaos. Flames licking at the ruined bulkheads of Cathara's Reach, alien debris floating in zero-G, the dying groans of a Varelian defense force pushed beyond its limits. The enemy, still unnamed, still silent, moved with terrifying coordination, slicing through defensive lines with cold precision. Then everything changed. With a tear in space and a ripple of reality itself, they arrived. Terran drop pods slammed into the outpost's upper decks, melting through enemy lines with explosive force. The Varelian defenders, exhausted and on the brink of annihilation, could only watch in stunned disbelief. The first human out of the drop pod was grinning. He walked through plasma fire like it was mist, massive armor plates glowing with kinetic shielding. Enemy shots pinged off his armor with a hollow clink, as if the universe had forgotten how to hurt him. Behind him, more Terrans emerged, each carrying weapons that looked more like small reactors than rifles, and they were laughing. Not out of madness or bloodlust, but like this was a sport. One even high-fived a squadmate mid-charge. The Varelians, bred for protocol and tactical rigidity, were frozen. Their commander, High Strategist Nelzir, stood behind a crumbling barricade, transfixed as a human soldier leapt from a tower, mid-air, onto an enemy gunship, riding it like a surfboard as it spiraled toward the deck. With a fistful of explosive gel, he cracked it open and dropped into the cockpit like a demon from legend. Another Marine calmly strolled through a collapsing hallway, trailing fire, casually pulling injured Varelians from rubble while tossing grenades over his shoulder with precise, uncaring grace. When the tide had clearly turned, Commander Nelzir forced himself forward and waved down what he assumed was the commanding officer, a tall woman in matte black armor, helmet under her, arm sipping from a thermos. You came. Why?" Nelzir asked, struggling to process what he was seeing. The human looked him over and gave a crooked smile. "Heard someone was in trouble," she said, pointing casually to the remains of the enemy fleet being vaporized in orbit. "Didn't say we couldn't come." That answer chilled Nelzir more than anything else that day. There had been no request, no authorization, no diplomatic clearance. Humanity had simply heard the call, not even meant for them, and responded with overwhelming force because they could. In less than 20 minutes, the outpost was secure. Enemy survivors were nowhere to be found. Scans reported 0 biological remains. The Terran medics, still eerily cheerful, patched Varelian wounded with technology decades beyond the Concordat standard. One jokingly offered to install a few upgrades if the commander ever wanted better knees. Nelzir watched it all unfold, torn between awe and dread. These were not the humans the Concordat had once feared, flesh and blood, aggressive but predictable. These were post-Earth humans, shaped by exile, time, and something deeper. They had become creatures of action, engineered to survive, fight, and overcome in ways no species could match. The battle had turned not because the enemy grew weak, but because the wrong species had heard the call. The unknown attackers, once confident and relentless, suddenly broke formation and fled the battlefield. Their coordinated assault crumbled in the face of humanity's overwhelming, unpredictable response. What was supposed to be a simple hit-and-run turned into a crushing defeat. The surviving Varelians stood among the wreckage of their outpost, stunned but alive, as the Terran Marines secured the perimeter. The contrast was striking. Varelian faces wore expressions of awe and confusion, while the humans, casual, almost indifferent, moved with quiet efficiency. Commander Nelzir, still processing the sheer ferocity and relentlessness of humanity, approached the human captain to express his gratitude. "We owe you our lives," Nelzir said formally, bowing slightly. "Your timely intervention saved the outpost." The human captain simply smiled, handed Nelzir a steaming cup of coffee, and asked casually, "Is there more work to do?" That was the moment the Varelians realized something fundamental had changed. Humans no longer operated by the old diplomatic rules. They were not here to negotiate, to plead, or to ask permission. They were here to act, and their idea of help was vastly different from anything the galaxy had ever seen. Back on Earth, the ramifications of the event echoed far beyond. The battlefield. Military Command convened a closed-door session analyzing the intercepted Varelian distress signal, the rapid deployment of the Terran fleet, and the unprecedented level of firepower deployed without waiting for clearance. The conclusion was clear and decisive. If someone screams for help, the new directive read, go scream louder with bigger guns. No more waiting, no more protocol delays. No more diplomatic niceties when lives were at stake. This principle became the cornerstone of humanity's new galactic strategy, a strategy that the rest of the galaxy would soon learn to fear and respect. The galactic network itself, the vast web of communication, intelligence, and cooperation maintained by the Galactic Concordat, was irrevocably altered. Where once the calls for help were met with cautious investigation, now they sparked immediate and overwhelming response. Other species, previously relying on diplomacy and protocol, found themselves outmatched not just by technology, but by a will that refused to be ignored. Humanity's presence became a disruptive force, reshaping alliances and power balances. Varelians, once hesitant and overly formal, adapted quickly, learning to appreciate the blunt efficiency and raw power of their new allies. But for many in the galaxy, the message was clear. The humans were no longer just another species. They were a reckoning, and the days of measured, calculated diplomacy were over. After humanity's brutal and unexpected intervention at the Varelian outpost, the Galactics, Concordat scrambled fleets to pursue the vanished humans, curious, alarmed, and unwilling to accept their disappearance as a simple retreat. Several Concordat fleets were dispatched into the void, tasked with tracking, capturing, or confronting this mysterious force that had suddenly re-emerged in the galaxy with overwhelming power. But none returned. The first fleet vanished without a trace, leaving behind only scrambled, distorted transmissions, glimpses of something incomprehensible. The second fleet reported bizarre phenomena before its comms fell silent. Cities inside stars, humans seemingly walking unharmed through black holes, and ships dissolving mid-jump as if the very fabric of space rejected their passage. Panic rippled through the Concordat's command. The humans weren't just fleeing or hiding, they were transforming. Intelligence gathered from deep space probes hinted that humanity had ascended beyond known physics and biology, becoming something new, something terrifying. They had transcended traditional limitations. Reports described humans no longer confined to ships or bodies, but existing in multiple places at once, their presence scattered across dimensions. Fleets chasing them were swallowed by the void, trapped in impossible geometries or erased from existence altogether. For the Concordat, it was a horrifying revelation. Humanity was no longer a species to be negotiated with or contained. They were a force of nature, an ascended civilization wielding power beyond imagination. The galaxy began to fear that humans had become something otherworldly, something that could rewrite the rules of existence itself. The warships that never returned became a legend whispered in hushed tones, a warning passed from captain to captain. No fleet dared to chase the humans anymore. Humanity had crossed a threshold. They had moved beyond survival. They had become a new apex predator in the cosmic order. Just when panic gripped the Galactic Concordat and hope seemed lost, Earth reappeared. It was as if the planet itself had blinked out of existence and then back again, right where it had vanished. But this was no ordinary return. The Earth that materialized was altered, transformed by forces beyond comprehension. The continents had shifted in unfamiliar ways, landscapes twisted and rearranged as though reality itself had been rewritten. Vast mountain ranges rose where oceans once sprawled, deserts had replaced forests, familiar landmarks were gone or distorted. The very geography seemed alien. Above the surface, the sky pulsed with strange energy. Glowing auroras stretched beyond the poles, rippling across the heavens in patterns that defied physics. The atmosphere shimmered with colors unseen, hues that no known element could produce. The planet radiated a silent power, an eerie, otherworldly hum felt by all who approached. The Concordat's fleets, desperate for answers, cautiously closed in. Sensors detected no heat signatures, no power emissions, and no life forms. The Earth was silent and still, a ghostly monument suspended in space. Then, as the lead fleet neared, something impossible happened. A message burned into the hull of the flagship. An ancient starship captain recalled how metal had never been so seared. Letters formed, glowing with an otherworldly light. "You shouldn't have come looking." There was no voice, no transmission, just this warning, etched deep into the ship's armor. Moments later, the ship was violently ejected from orbit by an unseen force. Instruments failed, crew reported hallucinations, and the flagship vanished from scans. Earth was back, but it was no longer a home. It was a warning, a boundary. The Galactic Concordat realized the terrifying truth. Earth was no longer a planet. It had become a symbol of something greater, a new frontier marking the line between the known universe and an unknown fate. The message was clear: don't follow. Because beyond this transformed Earth lay something that even humanity feared.